Cindy Rackowitz joining us. Cindy was the corporate vice president of promotions, all divisions worldwide, huge, and the president of Playmate Promotions and modeling agency. That's the department that we answer to. And Cindy was a big part of our life and our career at Playboy Entertainment. Cindy worked at Playboy from 1986 to 2002 for 16 years. Cindy definitely stepped into a tough role and a tough time at Playboy. The company in 1986 needed a New York-based public relations professional to rebuild the image after Newsweek ran a cover story featuring Hef and Carrie Leigh. Carrie Leigh was one of Hef's girlfriends of many years. But the title of the magazine, or the headline on the cover of Newsweek, was "The Party's Over, the Club's Closed." Yes, the Playboy clubs had closed. The party's over. I don't know about that, but the magazine circulation was also dwindling and all signs of changing times in the 80s. The PR team had to manage communication with multiple constituents as Playboy Enterprises changed its business model. Subscription sales over single copy sales was the focal point and was the job that Cindy showed up for. And she handled it in a massive way. She aggressively built the entertainment focus into premium cable and video, building its global presence, which was a huge era in the history of Playboy. And it was all new. It was the era of cable TV, .com era. Now, that was a very, very difficult thing to do, considering that there was 40 years of archives, 40 years of history. So the amount of archives that they had, 40 years, think about that. It was massive. Cindy worked very closely with Hugh Hefner in executing an impressive online presence and building the .com division. And it was a monumental undertaking, and it was done and it was achieved.
So at Playboy Enterprises, I had several positions starting in the New York office of Playboy Enterprises. And what a lot of people don't know is that New York City was a very powerful hub for Playboy Enterprises. People think of Playboy and they think of Chicago and they think of Los Angeles. They don't really remember or understand the presence that they had in New York City. And basically, the editorial department, the fashion department was there, the movie critic was there. We had, a news editor there. We had our cartoon editor and our fiction editor. There was a lot of intel, Playboy content intel that took place in New York City. And then you had the advertising sales department, because that's Madison Avenue. So if you're selling pages, you had to have a huge presence in New York City. So it's interesting when I talk about Playboy, they're like, there was a Playboy in New York. Was it the club? And I'm like, no. And I went through my whole thing. And then what happened is I had to produce Playboy's 35th anniversary event. And we did it at the World Trade Center, which is so sad because history kind of wiped it out. But it was such an amalgam of tremendous personalities. One of our guests of honor was Alex Haley, who, wrote the book Roots, because nobody would publish Roots because it was controversial and there was racism, right? But Hef gave Alex Haley a shot and published the first chapter of Roots in Playboy magazine. So the whole 35th anniversary, tied that all together. We had people who were interviewed. We had 35th anniversary Playmate, Fauna McLaren. At the time before Trump knew he was going to be president, well, he was there as a guest. It was just such a different concoction of personalities that made up the history of Playboy magazine. And it got so much press, and it got this huge feature story in the New York Times. And that's when Hef said, see, that's the kind of PR we want. I want that girl in LA.
Yeah.
Now, Alex Haley, I want to hear more about Alex Haley. So you met him and obviously worked with him. Now, I want to get to the controversy then, just for the audience, because Roots is such a famous book and then turned out to be such an incredible movie. And no one would touch what he was doing. Why then? Why weren't
Listen, unfortunately, you know, we grew up in a long history of racism. And this is something that Hef was so ahead of his times in, civil rights. So when we talk about Alex Haley, this is a part of Hef that people need to be reminded of. A part of Hef's history is I believe that he was a copywriter for a greeting cards company, and when he was a young copywriter, and he left because he felt that there was discrimination. He felt very, very strongly about equality for all. And people don't remember that about him. People don't talk about that. I mean, the support that he gave to these, communities that always fought for equal rights, Hef really gave it to them and gave it to them big time. Nobody else wanted to publish an excerpt about the history of slavery.
It's a pretty incredible Q&A. And that's what was fun about Playboy. Echo and I are always amazed thinking about some of these really, they were controversial at the time, sadly, that he would give this platform, like you just said, for people that had no platform, especially people of color, in a time, where it was so backwards and ridiculous, and would give them these wonderful Q&As and open the dialogue and help people see in. And I think that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
On that topic, I wanted to tell you, Cindy, I think it was just last week, just doing research and whatnot, I found this really amazing website that is archives of every type of digital media that's ever been out there. And the FBI files about between Hef and the FBI were on there. And so I was able to download it and go through there. And it was so, fascinating, obviously, that we can actually tangibly see that and read it and actually see the correspondence between J. Edgar Hoover and Hef and Victor Lowndes at that time. But, from the very get-go, it was like everybody was up against him, and it was nothing but controversy. But then you see the way he speaks and the way he responds to try to engage these people and right down to he invited Vic or not Vic, he invited J. Edgar Hoover into the Playboy Club in New York, sent a letter with a formal invitation with the key, and then said, however, if you'd like to use the media room, you're going to have this special keys. You're going to have to talk to the bunny mom. But at the end of the day, it goes right back to the very, very, very beginning of the principles on which Playboy was founded and what it really, implemented from the very get-go. And, Hef was, again, very, very ahead of his time. He was not going to let the government or anybody tell him, no, you can't do this, or you can't touch on this and you can't touch on that. And, it's baffling to me, and we were talking about this before we started recording, Cindy, is that there's so much incredible history out there just about Hef and Hugh Hefner himself, and then Playboy, obviously, and the brand and the magazine and the publication. But there was so very, very much that he did for our society, for our world as we know it today. And that gets pushed down, or people are not interested in researching, or people are not interested in history. I don't know. But that's been the most fascinating thing for me doing this podcast. And we're like, of course that happened. Of course.
Well, what Hef would say, I could see him talking about it right now because he was very vocal about it, is that because Playboy was so successful, I mean, mind-boggling success, buy nudes of Marilyn Monroe, you slap it, in a magazine and you send it out and everybody wants it. What happened is because of its success, everybody wanted to shake Playboy's tree because then they knew that they would get their point of view out there. So we see this in history with the government. We see it with people who wanted to fight and say that Playboy was deemed obscene when it never was. We see all these people that were always trying to, what Hef would say, shake Playboy's tree, And this goes to current times. So now we still see people trying to shake Playboy's tree. Because when you have a brand that is so monumentally successful, and at its time, it really was, everybody wants a piece of it. They know if they attack Playboy.
Don't you find it interesting that, because really, just like Marilyn Monroe, there are few icons in the world, really. Few icons, and he was one, just like but there's a movement that is forgetting what he was and painting him as something he wasn't. And that's why we think it's so important to hear people like you that were right there on the forefront of, things that people don't realize what Hef was doing. And, the brand, and we believe this, I'm just going to come out and say it. I feel like, it's one of those things only Hugh Hefner could have done. Not one person could fill his shoes. Not one. He had the vision. He fueled that vision. And, sadly, I think as age caught up, and as it will with all of us, when the vision goes, the vision goes. And I think that it slowly died as he was dying, and then it's dead. It will never be revived. I believe it with all my heart. It will never be revived. There was one Playboy, there was one Hugh Hefner. And it's really sad how someone can take a brand, and I'm sure it happens all the time, but we don't talk about it because they're not as prolific and historically awesome as Hef, but that try to take the credit or think that money's gonna buy this brand, and that it doesn't.
Well, he would say if he were alive, these people that we're talking about in modern times, they're shaking the Playboy tree here.
I love it. You're shaking the Playboy
like, if they did it 60 years ago, why wouldn't they be doing it today? The sad that he's not alive anymore. So it's kind of like really sad shaking of the tree. It's shaking of.
I mean, it's not surprising, and I've actually been really keeping an eye on like Playboy and their SEC filing. I wouldn't be surprised if they're not around for a couple more years, to be brutally honest. I mean, they're losing money hand over fist. They're losing their licensing dollars. Obviously, the publication does not exist, and they're trying to turn it into this all-inclusive LGBTQT, for everybody. And I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, there was a format that worked, and for somebody to come in and just completely like eradicate that because it's the future or whatever, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
I have a question for you, Cindy. Of all of the years that you were there, I know this is a tough one because you probably have so many memories, but what is something that stands out for you as far as something you felt like this is it? This is a brand that I am proud to be a part of, and I want to hear some stories, like anecdotes of what you've learned and all of those things.
Well, but wait. Before that, let's ask you this, because this was one of my favorite questions we asked last time. Yes, how did you find the job at Playboy? Was it the classified?
Exactly. And I love her story. We already heard it, but we want our audience to hear it. Yes, Cindy, tell us how you found out that you were working for Playboy, how you ended up.
So I was a new mom, and which gave me a leave of absence from my current job at the time because I was on maternity leave, and now's a good time for me to sort of read the New York Times and look at the classified ads. I knew I had to work, and that my then husband was probably going to be, the home daddy, just situation at the time. And, so there was an ad in the New York Times that said, connected publicity manager needed for #1 men's magazine. So I was 27 at the time, and I knew what Playboy was, but I never connected that to #1 men's magazine. I thought it would be GQ or Esquire, because I thought Playboy was a nude magazine that my dad had in his walk-in closet, walk-in closets at that time.
I love
And, so I wrote a really, really nice cover letter because I had time. I was just a young mom at home with a newborn pretty much. And, I went out with my baby and I came back, and then we had voice messaging. So, you came home to this machine.
The answering machine, right?
Yes, the answering machine.
That was what it was. I couldn't remember. And you played back your messages. So I came back, put the baby down, and it had said, "Hi, we're responding to an ad that that you showed interest in from the New York Times. This is Playboy."
Woo!
This is
Whoa!
Playboy. And and then I'm like, "Oh my God, wow." And it was so funny. In the next couple of weeks, I also got an offer from the New York chapter of the Red Cross to be their publicity manager. Like, am I going to be Barbie Benton or Clara Barton? And my ex-husband said to me, "You're really thinking about you? Like, you really are giving this thought? I mean, come
You
on."
harlot. You harlot.
And, so I went for the interview and I talked, to the New York people and the New York staff. And they put me on a couple of phone calls with Los Angeles and Chicago. And I was offered the job. And at the time, it was $42,000 a year, which was 1986, which was not a bad salary at the time. And God, the whole thing is, sometimes I just had to tap myself to feel, is this real? Especially when Hef really wanted me to come to LA. When he recognized what my talents were in terms of seeing Playboy as a whole, not just getting press in the New York Post for the TNA, but that I really understood the intelligence and the brains behind the whole editorial content and their history, and understood how they were always kind of preyed upon because they were controversial, and how, as a publicist, I would have to contend with that and, handle it. So I had those instincts. And as I mentioned before, the 35th anniversary was a turning point because that's when Hef
Was
really
that the
recognized
first
who
time you
I
met him in
was.
person?
I didn't really know him very well in person. I had been to the first Playmate of the Year party at the mansion was Donna Edmondson, the 19, I guess, yeah, I started in November, so she was the 1987 Playmate of the Year. So I met him briefly, and the editorial team introduced me to him and said, "This is the girl that's running things in New York." So when I got that story in the New York Times for the 35th anniversary party in 1989, he remembered me because we met a couple of times after the first time I met him. And he said, "Okay, so who got that story in the New York Times?" And the editorial team said, "That's Cindy Rackowitz." And he said, "Is that the girl with the skinny legs from New York?" He said, "I really like her. I want to get her out here," because he kept on saying, I don't want a corp person. I want a proactively creative visionary that can help me tell Playboy's story globally. He didn't want a yes person. He wanted somebody to tell him no when he was wrong, and he knew I had the balls to do that. Always wanted me there because he kind of invited me to tell him no, you can't do this. And I have to tell you, there were several times where I had to remind him of that.
Oh, wow. It says a lot about you, Cindy, a lot, because he was very picky. I mean, that's one thing we're learning too. He didn't just put anybody on the team. There wasn't anybody that the brains, you had everything that he, it, like you said, he saw your talents and your abilities and what you were going to bring to Playboy. You were a huge asset, and it's really incredible. I imagine he, you know, appreciated you maybe even more than I don't know. I would love to hear some of those times when things were better with Playboy because of your, so that's the word I'm going to use, your badassery.
I'll tell you a story that you're going to both love because, it was a very sort of behind the scenes angst. And I was still in New York City, and I was very, very close with sort of the gay community and the drag queen community. Was, if you were involved in that scene at that time in the 80s, you were it. Okay. But it was such a movement at that time, and it might seem weird to you, but those are the parties that every executive wanted to get into. And there was a woman by the name of Suzanne Barsh that was the brain trust behind all of this. She wasn't gay. She was just a brilliant kind of Lady Gaga-like kind of character. And she would rally all these queens and make these events that went until 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And, they would be on stilts with the big white hats and, the big, diamond eyelashes. And it was just a very sort of weird, cool time to be a part of that. And being a part of that is what brought Playboy some of the newer men's fashion designer advertisers, because that's the community you had to be in to be hip. And sort of a lot of Playboy's challenges was that it was aging because it was started in the 50s. And how do you find a new contemporary for Playboy so that the most avant-garde advertisers and influencers would want to buy stock, by advertising into the magazine. So what came out of that is doing a drag ball at the Playboy Mansion. I have pictures somewhere, and they're not digital. They're, in my photo albums, but I do have pictures. And it was so cool. Pam Anderson was a judge. We had other celebrity judges, and we had the newest fashion, the most contemporary fashion designers putting together their interpretation of a bunny look.
How cool. Wow.
So, you're bringing a bunch of drag queens to the mansion, but also bringing the best celebrities. And, Thierry Mugler is designing his interpretation of a bunny look. I mean, it was the hottest. Dolce & Gabbana. They had like an S&M bunny bag jumping down. I can't tell you how successful it was and how much press it got. But the angst is that Hef was feeling really uncomfortable about having a drag ball at the mansion. And I had to keep on assuring him that if you want to get the avant-garde New York City, if you want to stop people from criticizing Playboy for being outdated, this is your formula. And I thought there were so many nights that I was fired.
Oh, funny. Yeah, because he knew his audience, and he really stuck to his heterosexual males and the female form. But I mean, really, we've talked about that, and it really had a huge audience for that. But he knew how to think outside of the box and listen to you. And
it was not easy, Karina. Okay.
Yeah.
There were And this is the times before digital phones, but he made sure that I had one of those tower phones and a beeper. I was like a doctor. Okay. I could run around without being beeped if Hef wanted to talk to me in the middle of the night.
Can you picture that, Echo? She has her beeper. Why is that so funny with Hugh Hefner beeping? Hold on. I have to go call Hef. Getting beeped. Hef's beeping me again.
Very good. Wait, actually, that's a really good point, Cindy, that you just made about of that time of people saying, Playboy was dated or out of touch or what, not out of touch, but dated. And you were behind the whole .com department, huge thing for Playboy to take on, but they were behind the 8 ball on that. So talk about that a little bit, because that was a huge.
Well, that was another thing that, in those times that I would have to kind of, speak up to Hef. What was difficult for Hef to understand, very, very difficult to explain to Hef, that creating a website is not the same kind of quality as producing a magazine. That a website is a cheapskate version of publishing. It's not a publication. It's not high quality photos where the lighting is perfect and everything is right. And he had such control over that before, we went to the .com phase of our global, state of being. So we had to really explain to him that this isn't simply taking a magazine and putting it online. This is tearing it apart and putting it back together in a cheapskate manner. And that took some of us, and I would say probably 6 of us that he would listen to, years to kind of make him feel comfortable, but he finally got it. And the thing that allowed him to get it was the interactivity of it all. When we, would have a dial-in sort of, chat with Hef, and he saw that it was in real time, not in delayed time, that's what made him understand what the worldwide.
Yes, because one of the most fascinating things about the magazine and why people loved it so much, and they're still emulating it to this day, was the interactive. He loved that, even with the gatefold and the interaction and the finding the bunny head. And I loved that about, even when he did the 3D issues. And I think, how many 3D issues were there? I should know that, but I don't know that people loved it, but he liked that. So I imagine, that he saw, that's one of the things that clicked. That makes sense with him.
Interactivity to get it. And one of the first influencers that got him to be interactive, Mark Cuban. The first Playboy chat was produced by Mark Cuban.
Isn't that incredible?
Do you guys remember GlamourCon?
Yes. I do remember GlamourCon.
So it was the first GlamourCon that Playboy was involved in. And that's first chat with Hef took place. That was like such a huge undertaking. Oh my God.
Did you head that up, Cindy? Were you
that was another
wow.
Oh my God, if I didn't shoot myself at that time, I'm never going to shoot myself. Yeah.
I want to hear your worst nightmare story. We never used to do that, but I want to hear like someone that was a nightmare and that you had to put a fire out.
Stories that were nightmares.
So I was just on I think it was ID, True Crime, and they interviewed me about Stacey Arthur, and I wasn't going to do it because
you read my mind. Oh my God.
Okay, well let's you know what? We may as well. I'll tell you what, I had put that out of my mind, Cindy. It was so bizarre and one of the scariest times of my life, because that guy, we knew he was crazy, that would call into the lines. And for the listeners, Stacey Arthur was a Miss January. 1991, Stacey Arthur was a Playmate, obviously, Miss January, and a budding country singer. And we used to, as Playmates, one of our jobs, or if you will, it was a brand new thing. It was the 900 lines where people would call in this 1-900 number, talk to your favorite Playmate. And fans loved it. And they would call and we would talk to different fans. Well, they weren't allowed to talk about anything sexual. You had an operator listening. There were a lot of measures in place. And you have to remember, this is before social media. It's before, cell phones. We didn't have a cell phone. So we have these special big phones. I remember they sent us these phones and there was a thing to rest your shoulder on, and it was extra money for the girls. And it was fun to talk to the fans and engage. And it also, if you wanted to further your career in, business or whatever, you had people that you could talk to. So that said, one man used to call in all the time. And we all started realizing this guy's not right. He wasn't right in the head. And he even sent me, I have it somewhere because I brought it with me for that show that I'm going to be on. I can't wait to hear what Cindy has to say about it and her memories of it. Because for me, I was rooming with Stacey Arthur. She had a husband who I never met them in my life. And, you'd be bunking with Playmates it was when Hugh Hefner and Kimberly were married. So it was the family home. And then we would stay in the bungalows if we were doing photo shoots, video, the new Playmate, whatever. So I was sleeping in a bed right next to Stacey, and her husband called me and said, "Please take care of Stacey." And I'm thinking, why is he saying this to me? I told the FBI this. I told him all the truth of my side because I can't wait to hear what Cindy, because I was with her. So then she would say, he would call and he wrote me a poem and sent me a rose and said, I have the poem somewhere, but it says, I kept all this stuff because it was so bizarre. It was so bizarre. It was just odd. So he said, don't let her drink with her medicines. And she would open this drawer and had all these meds. And I had never seen anyone take prescription drugs at that age. I'm 20 years old. I'm like, I don't take drugs. And I'm looking at this, and Hef was against drugs. And we need to get that out too, because there's rumors going around that there might have been a time in the 70s, that time passed. And he was not going to allow the FBI to have anything, no drugs. So I'm looking, and it was prescription meds, so it wasn't illegal. And I'm looking in this drawer going, why did she take so many things? So he says, don't let her drink with her meds. Well, I'm not her keeper. I'm doing my photo shoots in the morning. Well, she had a bottle of champagne that night and tells me she's going to meet with this guy, the guy that's crazy. I said, what are you doing? For one thing, your husband said, don't drink with your medicine. I said, and another thing, we're not supposed to meet with these guys, and you're not supposed to leave the mansion. So I don't know the whole story. Did she meet up with them? I don't know, but I know that she met up with the butler and the security guard and met up with a bunch of guys, because I had the FBI at the foot of my bed that morning, the next night. And I'm like, what's going on? And there's the FBI. And they said, when's the last time you saw Stacey Arthur? And I'm like, what? Is she okay? I thought she was dead. I thought she met with the guy and she's dead. That was the first thing in my head. Then they proceeded to they couldn't give me information. I didn't find out till she went on hard copy. And I had just found out I got Playmate of the Year. Long story short, she claimed that the butlers and security raped her. And she was trying to get $70 million. Claim they raped her. Well, we know. I know in my heart. Those guys, they wouldn't be working there. You're not even allowed to they're not allowed to fraternize with you. I'm sure I don't know. She probably drugged them. I don't know. I hate to say that. I don't.
So you're part one because you were bunking with her. I'm part two. So I was in between the FBI showing up in your room and the incident. Okay. So I got a call that night. I was still in New York City. You know, asking me questions about about this incident. And I believe it was the Wall Street Journal that called me for, like, all these press calls were coming into my home because everybody knew I was a girl to contact if there was news. Okay. Asking me questions about a rape at the mansion. So I found out, I got on the phone with corporate security and I found out that the FBI was already there doing an investigation. So before the time that they showed up, you know, at, in your realm, um, a lot of things happened at the mansion. And I remember the chronological events because I had to document them, both with the FBI and with the press.
Okay.
And what we found out is that because he was married to Kimberly at the time, when Stacy claimed that she was raped, Kimberly called, the police for an investigation immediately, and and had her medically examined.
So she did have her medically
Kimberly
examined.
was the biggest hero in this incident because Kimberly did.
Okay, I'm going to already tell you that this show I was on, they said he wasn't. They said that she refused to be medically examined, that Kimberly wanted her to, and she wouldn't.
So what I will tell you is what the police investigation and the DA's office concluded. Okay. So the he said, she said, becomes sort of irrelevant because this is the conclusion of the investigation. What Hef did was right. And what Kimberly did was right. They brought in the authority. There was no question. A Playmate was raped. The authority.
They were concerned about her.
Exactly. The conclusion of the investigation is that it was consensual sex because rape shows a different kind of tissue, history than consensual sex. And basically, it was concluded that she invited these people in the jacuzzi to have sex with her. So then the press asked me, well, then why were, the wait staff fired? Why were the butlers fired? I said they weren't fired for having the consensual sex. They were fired for having consensual sex on company time.
Thank you. Yeah, Hef said no. I remember, they would be, I remember the butlers. It was so funny. Kevin, I can't wait to have Kevin on. I remember them. They're like, they knew, they obeyed the rules too. Like, but what guy's fantasy? That was probably all of their secret, and they're human, but still. So then the story gets worse, Echo. So then, that happened, but right after that, I don't know how long after, Cindy will have probably the timeline better than I do. That fan that she told me that night she was going to meet up with, which I don't know, maybe, I don't know if she did. He traveled 3 days from California by train to Ohio, ended up shooting Stacy's husband and killing himself. And he had a train ticket back. So it's just all awful. And so for me, as a 20-year-old who, I get a phone call for one thing that I have Playmate of the Year. I'm so excited. Just find this out. And then I remember, because Cindy, you were there, Bill, everyone, you guys were you had the meeting, and then called me and said, we've decided that you're our 1992 Playmate of the Year. That's so exciting for me. I'm like, my gosh. It was the best time. And right after that, on the television, on one of the most popular shows of the time, I think she went on, I don't remember. Yes, she didn't say my husband was murdered. She was like, I find it odd that my roommate got Playmate of the Year. And I remember being kind of like, it was so odd. It was so sad. And it's all sad. I think the whole thing is so tragic and so sad, but what in the world? And then, so you were putting that fire out, Cindy.
That was one of the biggest fires. If you look online, you'll probably see me quoted in USA Today and the Wall Street Journal in Playboy's defense with all the documentation and the chronology, because I was working directly with the DA's office, because I can't talk to the press I didn't want to fudge up the investigation in any way. So we're all in coordination. I didn't get any sleep that night, so I was with you. Even though I was in New York, I really didn't get any sleep, but, we were working with the DAs. I took it so seriously. And that's what people don't know is that he cooperated. He didn't only cooperate with the authorities. He told the authorities, please come over. We had an incident. I believe it might, there might have been a crime. Come investigate it. And then it wasn't a crime at all. She just had champagne in the grotto and invited, the butlers to have sex with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I forgot, Karina, important, player you.
I'm sound asleep. It's funny, not to make it a joke, but I'm sound asleep. I'm like, I need my beauty rest. I'm going to be working tomorrow. No, I'm not going to drink champagne with you. I remember her with that bottle, and then the FBI. I'm like, my gosh, no idea all that's going down. It's crazy life. Oh my gosh. But I'm sorry, Cindy.
No, it was. But again, it's an example of how Hef always prevailed on, the very, the good side of life, and really taking care of anybody that was involved with the brand and not exploiting them at all. Just really looking out for their well-being. And this is a story that demonstrates and reinforces that.
Yes. He got the FBI involved immediately. He didn't dispute what she was saying. They wanted to know how they can help her, how horrible. And it was
but our PR machine, this is where PR worked very, very closely with the authorities and law enforcement. And that was probably one of the most exciting parts of the job, because we were hand in hand with the authorities and law enforcement. Law enforcement loved Playboy, and law enforcement knew that Playboy was not breaking the law.
Yeah.
So,
all the security, I always say this, I felt some of the safest I've ever felt was working for Playboy. And I learned that the hard, just because I was so young when I posed for the magazine and then was on tour doing my Playmate of the Year tour, I was very protected. So when I went and did other things, I'll tell you what, I just realized we're protected. And I feel like never dealt with the seediness that I did when I worked for someone else. If I was doing anything like a convention or, the modeling aspect of things, when I would go model somewhere else, it was awful. I remember thinking, ew, what is wrong with these people? I mean, Hef was very protective. There's really still a lot to talk about. I think we could have you on again and again. There's so much to talk about. This was such a good interview, and why we need sponsorship, because we need to be in the studio. I wanted to kind of close out with talking about what Cindy's doing now, and with her underprivileged. It's a whole thing she's loving doing. So let's just let her tell you about it.
I'm going to take you into my studio for a second, so you'll get an idea. So you're getting an inside look at the Fit for the Cause studio. You could see behind me the Fit for the Cause logo. This is where I teach people that can't get to the gym via Zoom yoga, Zumba, cardio, kickboxing, strength training. But we have contracts with hospitals, public schools, assisted living facilities, and we provide at no charge to the participant, licensed fitness programs to keep people healthy and nutrition programs. We serve 2,000 people. And, I have to say the connection is, because there's always a connection, is I'm following Hef's heart. I mean, you can't start up something like this unless you have passion, vision, the wherewithal to work hard all hours. I think balance in your life is overrated. I think all of us really value work, and that all comes from health. If you work hard, the playing comes. And it is such a privilege to serve 2,000 people, so many of them with special needs that can't go to a gym, who are really enjoying the Zumba and the yoga and the boxing.
Well, thank you for what you do. That is so awesome. Now, I'm going to go ahead and ask three. Let's ask her about the three things that describe Hugh Hefner that you think of him, that you wish you could have said to him, in his passing.
Visionary, ultra creative, and look, there's so many things about him. That's why I'm thinking hard. Brilliant. Just really brilliant.
I love it. And this is from a woman that's a woman's woman. A woman's woman.
I would say I am so blessed to have learned what I learned from you, and to have the privilege to work side by side with you, and even sit in bed with you without sleeping with you.
That's awesome. Oh, that's another. I love it. I love it, Cindy. Oh my gosh. And it's true. Oh, wow.
So fun.
It's been so fun.
So fun.
Just
And
seeing your face.
Listen, anything you need from me, just let me know. I want you girls to succeed. I said to Echo before that I think the climate, when we have hostile people shaking trees, is an opportunity for you. I think Hef would say that to you too. For the other side, the real side of Playboy, and I hope that you guys continue to tell the story.
Yeah, we keep saying as Americans, because we are Americans, there would be no Hugh Hefner without America. We need to be united and stop being divided. I'm tired of the blame and complain. We all have to come together. And Hef had a way of bringing people on both sides and thinking instead of emoting and just, I don't like that, so I don't like you. He was able. So that's been our message. Echo and I, we love our First Amendment as Hef did. And it's got to stop. We've got to love. We've got to unite and think, and not blame and complain. Do something. Ask not what you can do for your country. I know. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
No, this is really important. I think he couldn't live in this time, because what we lost was the effect of the intellectual debate.
Which is a loss of honor and integrity and dignity. And that's something he had.
Yeah.
He had integrity.
So, the intellectual debate, we can disagree on things. We don't have to kill each other.
No. And you can still love each other even. I have friends, we have completely different views. I don't hate them. I'm not going to not listen to them. I'm going to be open to ideas. That's what we need to do, is be open and listen and really hear each other.
And respect each other.
Yes, yes.
So, again, I'm here for you guys. I'm just a text away, as you know.
We're grateful that you came on and shared your stories, and we just love you and thank you so
Love
much.
you both so much. So much luck.
Thank you so much.